Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin today by offering my sincere condolences to the family and friends of Captain Jennifer Casey, who was killed over the weekend in the Snowbirds crash near Kamloops. And our thoughts are also with Captain Richard McDougall. I know we are all wishing him a speedy recovery. This has been a tragedy that has touched Canadians from coast to coast, and again, hit the people of Nova Scotia particularly hard. So our condolences and sympathies to the people of that province as well. Over the past few weeks, the Snowbirds have been traveling across the country, lifting Canadian spirits as part of Operation Inspiration. And this is a tragic end to a tour that has brought much needed joy to so many, and another difficult loss for the Canadian Armed Forces.
As you know, the House of Commons is set to resume normal activities on Monday. Like all Canadians, members of Parliament have mainly been working from home for the past 2.5 months. Parliament had to be suspended in order to protect the health of all Canadians, but given that the provinces are beginning to loosen restrictions and people are going back to work, we have to do the same thing.
No one is suggesting that all 338 members of Parliament show up next week. But I strongly believe that we can continue to do our jobs in the House while still respecting public health guidelines. Last week, Conservative members of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs published a report outlining the Conservative case for continued parliamentary democracy. Justin Trudeau has made it clear that he would like to permanently replace Parliament with press conferences. He wants an audience, not an opposition. That is absolutely unacceptable. This is not a partisan issue. This is about whether or not a democratic country like Canada should have a functional parliament. If members of the Bloc or the NDP or the Liberal backbench don't believe that Parliament is an essential service, they should consider why they ran for office in the first place. I strongly believe in the role of Parliament. It is vital and it must be restored.
In this time of crisis, oversight is more important than ever. The Liberals are spending hundreds of billions of dollars, but they refuse to do an economic update. The Parliamentary Budget Officer says that the debt could reach $1 trillion this year.
Taxpayers deserve to know how the government is spending their money, especially since we recently learned that Justin Trudeau is allowing the CERB to be paid out to fraudsters each month. That money should be going to help Canadians who are legitimately struggling, not criminals and people who are intentionally gaming the system. The
Conservatives have demonstrated that oversight and accountability produce better results for Canadians. We managed to increase the wage subsidy by 75% and increase it up to 75%, and we ensured that credit unions could offer benefits. We required the government to make benefits more flexible so that new parents and part-time workers would have access, and we also insisted on changes to connect employers to potential employees.
Members of Parliament need to be able to review and debate government legislation, to hear from witnesses, and to ask tough questions. We also need to be able to hold the Liberals accountable when they make bad decisions. And while there has been a tremendous amount of uncertainty over the last few months, one thing is abundantly clear: Justin Trudeau is letting Canadians down. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians are falling through the cracks because of unnecessarily rigid government programs, and they need our help. For example, if you don't have a CRA payroll number, you can't access the wage subsidy. If you are self-employed and receive dividends from a family business, you don't qualify for the wage subsidy either. If you make $1 more than the $1,000 limit, you lose your entire emergency response benefit. And these are just a few examples. Now, the government has been saying since March that they would fix these problems as time went on. We are now getting towards the end of May. So what exactly is Justin Trudeau waiting for? The
Conservatives are coming up with constructive solutions, and we're willing to facilitate the passage of the legislation. But in order for that to happen, the House has to sit regularly. One day to study legislation just doesn't cut it. The return of Parliament will also allow opposition members to table bills and motions that are inconsistent with Canadians' priorities.
Conservatives have proposed a temporary hybrid model where in-person sittings are augmented by video conference. That would allow a smaller number of members of Parliament to be physically in the House while still allowing everyone to hold the government to account. Conservatives strongly oppose, however, the use of these virtual proceedings to consider legislation, a budget, or an address and reply. We also need to get all parliamentary committees back up and running and give them their regular powers to call witnesses, request documents, pass resolutions, and write reports. Less than a third of all committees are currently meeting virtually, and those that are meeting are only allowed to receive evidence. The government must not be allowed to hide things from Canadians. That is why Conservatives are calling for committee powers to be immediately restored and for all committees to be able to meet virtually or using a hybrid model as long as public health guidelines remain in place.
The fact is that virtual committee meetings can't replace Parliament. I'm not suggesting that all 338 members of Parliament show up for work on Monday. But no government should use a health crisis to attempt to stop democracy or take away hard-won rights and freedoms.
Bottom line is that virtual committee meetings are not a replacement for Parliament. Again, I'm not suggesting that all 338 MPs show up on Monday. But no government should use a health crisis to try to effectively shut down democracy or take away hard-fought rights and freedoms. Conservatives will strongly resist any effort to use the pandemic to undermine our democracy or to implement a permanent virtual parliament. Our democratic system traces back hundreds of years and has seen our country through many crises in the past. And while it has evolved over time, it has always met in person. Justin Trudeau must not be allowed, as he has tried in the past, to use this crisis as an excuse to undermine the role of Parliament and avoid oversight and transparency. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Happy to take your questions.
We'll now take questions on the phone. 3 questions on the phone, 1 question, 1 follow-up per reporter. Operator, do we have our first question?
Absolutely, thank you. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Et s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question, la première question, est de Hélène Bizetti du Devoir. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur
Yes,
Scheer.
good morning, Mr. Scheer. So you want Parliament to come back on Monday, and we saw this the last time round, that the other parties aligned with the Liberals to pass a motion saying that they wouldn't come back. So what guarantee do you have that this same little scenario won't play out over again? Fighting against efforts to undermine the role of Parliament, that's not a little scenario, it's a fundamental principle. The question is different today from what it was on April 20th. For the economy, we're slowly reopening. And Parliament is an essential service. So I challenge Mr. Blanchet and Mr. Singh to explain to voters why they're working so hard now to avoid work. And I would invite Canadians in bloc ridings and NDP ridings to send a clear message to their members of Parliament. And that message should be that our democratic institutions are very important.
Clearly, the situation has changed. We believed that April 20th, even then, Parliament was an essential service, and we believe that today. We believe that we could have been sitting more regularly with a smaller number of MPs as far back as April 20th. Today, with more and more provinces lifting health restrictions. We believe that the justification for not sitting is even weaker today. If I can take my dog to an animal groomer here in Ontario, certainly members of Parliament should be able to show up for work and provide the much needed oversight and accountability on this government.
En supplémentaire, Monsieur Scheer,
As a follow-up, Mr. Scheer, a lot of sitting days have been missed and the summer's coming, and generally Parliament doesn't sit from June 20th until mid-September. In that context, would you like to see Parliament sit through the summer to catch up for the lost time, to make up for that? I'm just trying to get the House to begin sitting in May. That's my immediate goal. Whether or not the House should sit over the summer, that's an interesting question, but for now, I'm just trying to keep the debate on Monday, because we're supposed to sit Monday. So we should make an effort to get things a bit more back to normal. But I would say that the Conservatives would always be willing to work on behalf of Canadians any month of the year.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question. La prochaine question est de Mélanie Marquis de La Presse. À vous la parole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scheer, I'd like to come back to the layoffs at Air Canada, 20,000 employees. What should the government do, in your opinion? Clearly, there are a lot of people who've been laid off during these very tough times. Our thoughts are with the workers and their families. The airline industry was very hard hit, and programs like the wage subsidy have helped. If the government has a plan for further support, we're certainly willing to analyze that plan, both with a view to protecting jobs and protecting taxpayers.
Our thoughts are with those people in the airline industry that are being laid off. It's an extremely difficult time. The airline industry, of course, as so many industries have been impacted greatly during this crisis. There are programs that are available, like the wage subsidy, that were designed to keep as many people working as possible. If the government has ideas, or if they have a plan or proposals to provide additional measures, Conservatives will analyze that with the two goals of protecting jobs as well as protecting taxpayers.
Oui, puis en suivi,
As a follow-up, Mr. Scheer, in your interview with Evan Solomon, could you be a bit clearer about when you decided to renounce your American citizenship? And what do you think of the suggestion that you should be dumped as leader and replaced immediately instead of waiting any longer? As I said, when I decided to resign as leader of the Conservative Party, I decided to discontinue the process. So when I made that decision, I put a stop to the other process. The caucus gave me a vote of confidence to remain leader during the leadership race, to replace me, to give the party stability. And I'm confident that the next leader will have a united caucus, a focused and dynamic caucus, and a stronger caucus with more seats than we got in the last parliament, and a party that is ready to win the next election.
The caucus has given me a vote of confidence to continue on as interim leader during the leadership race, and I can provide the caucus with the stability during that leadership race, building on our successes in the past. And the next leader will inherit a unified caucus, a more dynamic caucus, a larger caucus, strengthened opposition. We have 121 seats, significantly more seats than we had in the last election, and a party that is ready to win the next election. And we've shown Canadians, even during a leadership race, that we can be an effective voice for their concerns. We were the only party with a principled position on the illegal rail blockades. We were highlighting liberal, wasteful spending. All kinds of examples of wasteful spending that weakened our ability to deal with this economic crisis that we're facing by ramping up massive deficits during the good years. And of course, we stopped the liberal power grab during this health pandemic, and we continue to highlight gaps and weaknesses in the government programs that are letting Canadians down. So our caucus is doing excellent work. I'm very proud of our team, and I'm excited for the next leader to take us to the next level and to ensure that we win the next election.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Bill Curie from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Scheer. People can see on video that you are able to ask the Prime Minister questions on video and sometimes in person on Wednesdays, but can you elaborate on what's missing because Parliament's not sitting? You've touched on some of this, like there's no ability to obtain documents, there's no questions on the order paper reviewing legislation, but for people who might not watch Parliament all the time beyond question period, what's been missing these past few months that you're trying to get at?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you rightly point out, the House is not actually sitting. We have a special committee that is sitting, and there are constraints around that. It's a different dynamic entirely to a normal question period. We have concerns about that. In addition, the committees have not been given the powers that they normally have to compel documents, compel witnesses. We've seen an example of the Canadian official at the World Health Organization refusing an invitation to testify before the Health Committee. Normally, parliamentary committees have the power to get government documents, to get answers to questions. All of that is missing during this crisis. In addition, the way the government is handling legislation has created major gaps that are letting Canadians down. Legislation is introduced and very hurriedly adopted. We don't see the normal process where there are committees that can hear witnesses, stakeholders who will be impacted by the legislation, so that amendments can be moved before the legislation is passed. That's a key issue. Back in March, we understood the need to get money out the door quickly, and we were supportive of efforts to get benefits in the hands of Canadians. But here we are in May, and there are still significant gaps that the Liberals have known about for weeks, and they still haven't done anything about. So we believe that a return to a more normal parliamentary cycle will give all parliamentarians better opportunities to, A, get answers for Canadians and get to the bottom of some of the issues that we're dealing with. In addition, it will allow for a better legislative process that will have better programs, better results for Canadians.
Follow up, Bill?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. We'll now take a question from the room. Julie?
Mr. Scheer, Julie Van Dusen, CBC. So in the campaign, you said you were going to renounce your U.S. Citizenship. Now you say you're not going to. So could you explain why it's so important for you to keep it?
Well, as I said, it was I made the decision that as Prime Minister, I would renounce that my U.S. citizenship. It seemed that was something that I felt was important for me to do. Given the fact that I won't be Prime Minister, I discontinue the process.
But could you explain why it's so important for you to keep it?
Well, the decision to renounce it was linked with my goal to become Prime Minister. So once I was not going to be Prime Minister, then that no longer held.
Joe Biden's comments, position on Keystone, what kind of a setback is that? What should the Canadian government be doing about that?
Well, it's extremely concerning. It's obviously very alarming for people who have been hit hard by the downturn in the energy sector, and people are reeling from our own government's attack on the energy sector. Keep in mind that this Liberal government canceled several pipelines, much needed pipelines that would open up market access in Asia and other countries. we believe that Justin Trudeau should be doing everything he can to encourage his friends in the Democratic Party to look at the economic benefits for both countries and the science behind the environmental analysis that have led to this project's approval.
Great.
Good morning, Mr. Scheer. Mackenzie Gray from CTV. President Trump last night seemed to indicate that he was considering potentially pulling out of the WHO and theoretically pulling funding from the WHO. You and your party have been critical of the organization. Should Canada continue to stay a member and give money to the WHO?
Our position right now is that the WHO must be open and accountable and explain the rationale behind those early decisions that have proven to be so wrong. The WHO was advising countries not to close borders, not to restrict travel. That was clearly bad advice based on faulty information. We believe that the WHO must be open and accountable and provide these explanations, and then we can make decisions after that. So we don't want to jump to conclusions, but there's ample evidence for Canadians to be concerned about the internal dynamics of the WHO and the accuracy of the information coming out of the WHO, and that needs to be addressed.
It was either last week or the week before, you asked a question about whether or not you'd send your kids back to school. Your answer was, yes, I'd like to send them back, but I'll need to hear from the health experts to determine what the right time is to send them back. That's what you said, correct?
I'm not sure if that's verbatim.
But yeah,
I was reflecting. I think a lot of parents, I know our own situation with 4 kids of school age, that keeping up with studies is a significant challenge, and the prospect of sending them back to the classroom is certainly appealing to my wife and I.
Absolutely. So my question is, which health experts are you looking to make the determination about sending your kids back to school, about going to the store? Who are the people you're looking to determine whether or not these are the things to do?
Like obviously, when governments create rules, we follow those rules, and when the government of Ontario says that schools aren't going to reopen, then obviously they're not going to reopen. And when that changes, we will send our children to school. I think a lot of Canadians have questions about the types of advice that's coming from the WHO, our own Canadian health experts. There's competing and conflicting advice. We remember the advice not to wear masks was changed to wearing masks. The advice from the WHO not to impose travel restrictions was changed to impose travel restrictions. I think all Canadians are trying to get through this as best we can, following the recommendations and guidelines as they exist at the time, while still, I believe it's healthy in a democratic institution to pose those questions to people making those decisions. So, as I said, as it relates to our own family, we're certainly looking forward to being able to send our kids back to school. We're obviously concerned about the health and safety of our own children and everyone else. But I am optimistic, and I am encouraged by some of the signs that we are reopening. And I think that government should be encouraging that and doing everything we can to facilitate that and make sure that the reopenings are successful by things like ensuring that there's adequate personal protective equipment, that there's support to the provinces as they do this.
We have time for one more question on the phone. Operator, do we have a next question?
Yes, certainly. The next question, la prochaine question, is from Stephanie Levitz from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Scheer. I wondered if we could get some thoughts from you on the opening of the Canada-U.S. border and what you think should be guiding that decision, taking into account all of the communities along the border that are desperate for tourism and really struggling in that regard.
Yeah, and there are so many industries that have been hit so hard. I mentioned the airline industry earlier. Obviously, the hospitality sector, restaurants have been hit particularly hard, and the tourism industry as well. Some of the things that we've been talking about as a Conservative caucus, some of our members of Parliament, is calling on the government to clearly explain what type of benchmarks or thresholds or plans they would put in place for that reopening. We also have heard from individual cases of hardship for individuals who are separated because of the closure. We certainly have a lot of compassion for those spouses who have been separated, or children who don't have access to one parent or another. But what we would like to see is a framework, as we've been calling for in the past. I think it's important for the government to explain what benchmarks we're going to be looking for, what targets we're going to be aiming to hit in order to ease some of these restrictions. And right now we're not seeing a lot of that. We're just being told to wait and see, and they'll make a decision in the coming days without really explaining what that decision will be based on. So we'd like to see more of an explanation from the government as to how exactly they plan on getting to that point, how they would manage the opening and the potential impacts that would have.
Thanks. And as a follow-up, Taiwan didn't participate in the World Health Assembly despite the efforts by Canada, Australia, and the U.S. and others to have them admitted. What do you think about that?
I think it's a shame. I believe that Taiwan being excluded from organizations like the WHO does not help anybody. It certainly is not. It's not fair to the people of Taiwan, and it prevents the World Health Organization and member states from having the wisdom, being able to learn from the experiences of the government of Taiwan and have their input on things. And China's foreign policy should not have so much influence on other organizations that the people of Taiwan are excluded from the participation in that. And I have to say that on this matter, it was only recently that the Trudeau Liberals in any way changed their tune on this. And don't be fooled by Mr. Trudeau's phony statements about China right now. We have been raising the alarm about this government's failure to stand up for Canada, its policy of appeasement to the regime in the PRC. And it's only now, after they see some polling data, that they've started to change their message on that. We have been calling for the government to pull out of the Asian Infrastructure Bank, to step up inspections of Chinese exports into Canada, and show the PRC that there are consequences for illegally detaining 2 Canadians and pushing Canada around. Justin Trudeau has refused to do that. He refused to do it in the last Parliament. He refused to say anything about that during the last campaign, and it's only in the last couple of weeks that he's changed his message at all, and I believe it's completely disingenuous.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thanks very much. Merci beaucoup.